I would define an at-risk youth, any young person, teenager, that without outside intervention, they won't transition into healthy adulthood. And I love to just give some emphasis on this. That question alone is what got me started doing character development in schools, mentoring through character development. A meeting I had in 2007 with the principal of Stone Mountain High School. And at that time she said, William, I've got 200 to 300 kids on my caseload right now. If they don't get intervention from someone like you, they'll be dead or they'll be in that juvenile facility that you go to in that county. I would define a high-risk youth. Obviously, it still involves the same thing of a young person not being able to transition to healthy adulthood, but to add on to that, it's a young person that without intervention, they're going to inflict damage to themselves or damage or pain to others in our community. I had a student at one of the schools, a group of students, about 20, 25 students, at a high school. I'm not going to name the high school there in DeKalb County. And I noticed that this young lady, every time she came to our group, she would have long sleeves on. And it turned out that this young lady who lived in a very dysfunctional home and had to all of a sudden move, from Denver to Atlanta, and through all of the different things she was experiencing, she admitted to me that, and pulled up her sleeve, that she had been cutting herself. And so when I say inflicting damage to themselves, she was what we would call a cutter. Right? And then obviously when we talk about hurting someone else, it could be joining a gang and robbing somebody, or God forbid, raping somebody or doing something just because they're hurting. And a lot of times when we're hurt, we want other people to hurt. So unmet hurt, it gets worse if it doesn't get met. So some of the most common risk factors would be distress in a home. And that could look like maybe it's a single parent home, maybe it's a foster care home, maybe it's a group home, maybe it's a home that's living in poverty, maybe it's a home where drugs are being sold out of. There could be all kinds of situations. And so just to expand on that just a little bit, if a mother is missing out of the home, normally you'll see a young person have challenges of attachment. They're attached, and it's hard to let go of certain things, and so they latch on and they're looking for attachment. If a father is missing, which is, I believe, one of the major problems that we have in our country. Matter of fact, I believe it's almost like an epidemic that we have. Last I looked, some 25 million plus fatherless kids in our country, which are growing up fatherless, much like I did most of my childhood. And when a kid has that happen, they have deep-seated anger. They have resentment against other males, because if there's never been a positive male role model in that young man or young lady's life, and now there's some male that wants to try to help give direction or focus for that young person, normally that's resented because they've never had that before. So I've never had it before, so why should I take or do anything that you say? Another situation could be violence in the community. I can remember there in DeKalb County in one of our groups, and a student saying, every day that he had to go home, he had to take his time and hide on his way home. And I asked him, what are you saying? And he said, somebody's after me. There's a gang after me. And so I'm afraid to go home, and he had to walk home every day. And so that could be another risk factor, is that you have to deal with violence in your community. Another risk factor would be abuse or neglect. I've met kids in juvenile facilities. I tell people this all the time. I've met students from all kinds of different narratives that are sitting in juvenile facilities. And one of the students that I met several years ago, he got arrested because he was sleeping in an abandoned apartment because he had no family. And because he plugged his phone in, he was also charged with theft because he plugged his phone in. And they didn't have a group home or foster place that they could send him at that time. And so, neglect could be a huge problem. Another major problem is that a lot of our young people that aren't doing well have been abused. It could be verbal abuse, or it could be actual violence, physical abuse. And so a lot of our young ladies and young men have been molested. And so a few other risk factors would be being behind in school. One of the things that I've noticed after 15 years of working with kids in juvenile facilities as well as in schools is that a good majority of our kids are like 2 to 4 years behind in their reading and writing. We would have to be not only in juvenile facilities and schools, we would be very sensitive to asking a kid to come to the board and write something or spell something. Spell the word thrive, spell the word behind, spell the word future. And a lot of our kids couldn't spell those words, or they write those words as if they were like a third grader or a fourth grader. If I'm being passed as if I'm graduating, but I can't read and write on my level, who's gonna hire me? I'm not gonna be able to go to a 4-year college. I might be able to get by going to a trade school, but just imagine this kid's emotion to being behind, imagine his or her self-esteem, how all those things have been impacted when a kid can't keep up. And then the simple fact of struggling with mental illness, suicidal ideation, depression. It was already like that before COVID, and now it's went to a whole nother level, as a result of COVID. So the relationship between risk factor and IQ, there was a study that was done several years ago, and the study simply said that if a kid had 0 risk factors, like the risk factors that we just talked about, which was some 8 to 10, if a kid had 0, their IQ would be 119. But if a kid had 1 risk factor, their IQ would drop down to 116. If he had 2 risk factors, then their IQ would drop down to 113. If he had 3 risk factors, then their IQ would drop down to 110. If they have 4 risk factors, then that kid's IQ would drop down to 96. Risk factors play an important role on a kid's learning and their IQ and so forth and so on. But I've had kids come to school when I was running in-school programming, and some of our young guys, they would have bags under their eyes and they hadn't slept all night. And if you hadn't slept all night, you hadn't gotten any sleep, and you hadn't had anything to eat, right? And you show up at school, how are you going to be able to learn? And I asked this particular young man, I said, well, hey, and I'm not going to say his name, but hey, what happened? Why are you not getting any sleep? And he said, Mr. J, he said, man, I had to stay up all night to watch my sister while my mom went to work because her boyfriend's been trying to sleep with my sister, my little sister. And I had to protect my sister. This is the real deal of what's going on with our families. I can't tell you the endless number of young ladies that I've met with and counseled with, and they've told me that, man, they've got kids by family members that abuse them and rape them, as well as in juvenile facilities. I've encountered the same thing over these past 15 years. So the stress is a real deal, and it can really knock down a kid's IQ quickly, not because they're not smart, not because they're bright, but because of the challenges of what they're experiencing there in their homes and communities. Yeah, so to have effective ministry that really it won't eliminate everything that we just talked about, but what does that look like for a young person? How do you accomplish and move a young person forward or see their trajectory change and help them become their hero of their own stories? Well, the number one thing is, I'm gonna give you 3, and there are several others, but the number one thing is to help them focus on their future. And so helping a young person know that their past or even where they are currently doesn't determine where they can be and where they want to be. And then the second thing is and that we focus on really here at Four Corners Group and this 1625 initiative is empowering young people, giving them not only a voice, but also giving them an opportunity to help make a difference. And so when students understand that, man, I can be of some value, and even though I don't have much, I can help somebody else be better. And that's why for us doing what we call Pay It Forward days, or what the world would call, serving in the community is so vital. We've taken students down to Safe House downtown Atlanta and done pancake brunches and feeding less fortunate people. And what I constantly hear from students is that, man, I didn't know I could make a difference because I always thought I didn't have nothing. But then when I saw somebody that had less than what I had, and that I could make a difference by giving a little of my time or even bringing a loaf of bread, that boosted them and helped them to understand how valuable they were as a person as well, right? So helping students to know that they have leadership skills and that they can add value to the community as well. And then the third thing, as it relates to really helping a young person, for the person that's doing the help, don't take anything personal. So for those of you that may be watching this and you may be mentoring a student, and you may be working in a school with students, or maybe you're working with us inside the juvenile facilities working with students, and to see students start making some progress and then all of a sudden they don't show up for programming anymore, or they don't call you back, a lot of people would take that personal. But you can't take things personal. Sometimes students, number one, they've never experienced somebody being honest with them and a person of integrity and wanting the best for them. And sometimes it's hard for them and overwhelming for them to handle that. So the first thing that they might do is stop showing up because they think this might be too good to be true. You mean you're spending time with me and helping me to be better, and you're not trying to take anything away from me? Some students have a hard time with that. And so just really understanding that whatever happens, or if a student, man, they start showing up at school and then all of a sudden they miss 4 weeks straight, you can't take it personal. Don't take it personal.